Thanks for joining us this evening for Dravet Syndrome Foundation's next educational webinar of 2023. Tonight's session, Being Person-Centered, a workshop for Dravet families, will be presented by our guest, Cheryl Ryan Chan. We'd like to start by thanking and recognizing tonight's title sponsor, BioCodex. And in addition, we'd like to thank Jazz Pharmaceuticals, Takeda, and UCB for their ongoing support of their sponsorship for this educational webinar series. This session, along with the slide deck, will be recorded and available on demand. We ask that all attendees remain muted with their videos off during this presentation. There will be time for Q&A throughout and at the end of the session, so please feel free to submit your questions to the chat box at any time. And we certainly encourage you to post your name and where you're from this evening. Hello, I'm Marianne Meskis, the Executive Director of the Dravet Syndrome Foundation and the parent to a 23-year-old son with Dravet Syndrome. We're so glad to share this session during June, which is Dravet Syndrome Awareness Month. I encourage you to follow DSF on our social media channels and share our posts along with your family story so that we can raise public awareness of Dravet Syndrome. With that, I'd like to introduce this evening's presenter, Cheryl Ryan Chan, to our community. Cheryl is a public speaker, trainer, community organizer, person-centered practitioner, facilitator, change agent, positive agitator, and self-proclaimed rum drinker, which I think is my favorite of all of her titles. She is mom to Nikki and is the voice behind Nikki's Law in Massachusetts. Cheryl serves on the advisory council to the Natalie Project in California, the board of directors at Nikki's Day program, the Center of Hope Foundation, is the past vice president of Autism Housing Pathways, and has served in numerous capacities within other organizations. Cheryl's gift is bringing people together and empowering them, as well as talking about tough topics. And with that, I'd like to welcome Cheryl.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here. It is an honor and a privilege, and I'm excited and nervous and all of the feels, but mostly just feeling really glad to be here. So thank you for having me. As Marianne said, my name is Cheryl Ryan Chan, and I live in Massachusetts. And I am a longtime person-centered practitioner. It's not just a series of things that you can do to help with planning that you may have heard about. It's also a thought process. It's a lifestyle. It's a way of thinking that I'm really excited to be able to introduce to all of you tonight, because being person-centered is one of the most important things that we can do during the lifetime of those we love. I did something called person-centered planning for about 10 years all over the country. And in the course of that, I worked with hundreds and hundreds of families individually and privately, doing futures planning and preparing for families and individuals of people with disabilities. I stopped doing that a few years ago, right somewhere in the midway through the COVID lockdown, in part because it was a little bit technically difficult, and in part because I decided that it was time for me to take this show on the big road, so to speak, and do a little bit more. I felt that I could have more impact on families if I start talking about bigger picture stuff and start going out to larger groups. Because what was happening was, over and over again, over those years of working with individual families, is I started seeing patterns of behavior and that were really, really worrisome to me. They were coming from families, they were coming from systems, they were coming from the individuals themselves. And I knew that my capacity my work in doing this individually for people really wasn't going to address all of these things that I was seeing, that were really things that I knew that if I started talking about, that I would be able to help families and systems. And so I started writing workshops around some of these experiences that I had, some of these topics. And I do, as Marianne said, I talk about the tough topics. I take on those topics that systems don't like to, or can't, or are afraid to take on and talk about. And a lot of them that families may or may not necessarily be ready to hear about, but they need to. And so that's kind of my mission. And so now I do it all over the country. I work and train and travel, and I've done this on Zoom for lots of national organizations. And I absolutely love everything that I do. I also come with, as a card-carrying member of our disability community, I am mom, as Marianne said, to Nikki, who has autism. He's 30 years old now. I also have a 24-year-old typical daughter. And so that's my family. And my journey with Nikki is one that is very, very difficult. It has been very difficult. He's now got a great life living with a caregiver about 45 minutes away from my husband and I. But getting there was very, very difficult. Nikki is severely impacted by autism, intellectual disabilities, and very, very serious violent, aggressive behavior problems. That is not how I like to introduce Nikki. And we're going to talk about the danger of doing what I just did tonight. But, you know, I want to be able to illustrate the idea that not only have I done this professionally for a long time, I also have my own personal journey, and the personal journey came first and brought me to where I am today. So for all of that, I am grateful that I get to be here. So let's get started. As I put on my little spectacles here, my little cheaters, so that I can see exactly what I'm doing. Before we dive into being person-centered and all that comes with that, I want to just read out to you this humble acknowledgement that I think is really important for me to include tonight. I don't typically just read my slides, but I am going to read this one because I think this is an important message for all of you, you know, experiencing and living with Dravet syndrome. The ideas behind becoming person-centered are a beautiful product of decades of discovery and the uncovering of horrible, inhuman treatment of people with disabilities in institutions all over the world. These ideas are presented by professionals, self-advocates, families, and justice seekers in a variety of ways. However, each idea points to the universal desire to manifest a vision of inclusivity and the pursuit of a joyful, dignified life. Underlying person-centered approaches that I'm going to discuss tonight is the idea of autonomy over our own lives to the best of each person's abilities. And these sound wonderful in theory, but when we add medical conditions and complexities that require the level of care that Dravet and other syndromes like it require throughout a person's lifetime, I have to acknowledge that being person-centered becomes infinitely more difficult. That despite the beliefs and commitments of us as caregivers to creating memories and moments of joy, to fostering opportunities for learning and growth, not everything I present here will seem achievable. The ideas and the ideals I present today, I believe, are universal. The practical applications are going to be our challenge. So I wanted to make sure that you understand that, because like I said, some of the things that I talk about today are universal, but when we're adding on top of all of these challenges that we already have, greater level of medical need, it can become difficult. So I get it, but I hope to bring you at least some comfort, some strategies, and some eye-opening understanding of what it means to be person-centered and how we can apply that. So let's keep moving forward. Now, first, I think we need to start off by saying, okay, what does it mean to be person-centered? And some of you may already have some experience in some capacity of being involved in person-centered X. There's persons that the X is a number of different things. It's called many things. It's called person-centered thinking, person-centered planning, person-centered approaches, person-centered methodologies, person-centered, there's a few of them. So there's a lot of different practitioners that have embraced these things and kind of made it their own. But, you know, a lot of the things that they do, even though they call it different things and maybe some of their methodologies present a little bit differently, it's pretty universal in terms of some of the principles that guide us to be person-centered. So these are my words. Being person-centered begins when caregivers and loved ones become vulnerable enough to embrace the ideas that those we love have the right and desire to be beyond us, that we can steward their humanity, but we don't own or control it. Now, the idea of stewarding humanity is my own, again, my own words. And that's another way for me to talk about what it means to be person-centered. Stewarding the humanity is a term that I use that differentiates from what systems might say that they're doing that is person-centered. And we're going to touch on that in just a second. But stewarding the humanity is really one of our greatest, as caregivers and parents and loved ones, this is one of our greatest missions. And one of our greatest responsibilities is stewarding the humanity of the person that we love. Now, it's not always easy because it can mean, us having to do some things that may not be comfortable for us. But let me give you a few examples of statements that are person-centered. My child can and should have relationships outside of those I have created, even with people I don't know or don't like. Here we go with the discomfort part. Bear with me. My loved one should be involved in the decisions about their daily lives, about their lives, daily and long-term, to the best of their ability. And finally, at some point, I will not be here to care for my person. So my most important job is to get them ready for life without me. So again, this doesn't necessarily hit on all of the principles that guide us to be person-centered. But when I'm talking with caregivers in particular, this is how I present the ideas about being person-centered. It's really, it's pretty self-describing when you talk about being person-centered. It seems to be so. And a lot of times us caregivers, us parents, and so on and so forth, feel pretty strongly that what we're doing is person-centered. But again, in my journey and my experiences with working with families, I find that sometimes we're a little off base, and sometimes that's because, in fact, being person-centered makes us vulnerable and can be rather uncomfortable. So this is how I want to present the idea of being person-centered to caregivers. Now, there are a lot of barriers for all of us, regardless of our situation, to doing all these things. There are external barriers to being person-centered in the things that we do for our loved ones. And that starts with the fact that we live in a system-centered world where conversations begin and end always with what's wrong with a person, what they can't do, why they can't do it, what needs to be fixed, what the prescriptions are, what the meds are, how much it's going to cost, what needs to be in the IEP, how we have to set up the service grid, and so on and so forth. Isn't it true that most of the time when we're having conversations about our loved ones, that really is the crux of the conversation? And yeah, maybe sometimes we have the opportunity to talk about our loved ones in terms of their humanity, talk about how great they are, talk about how, what their gifts and talents are. But a lot of times that part of the conversation is either at the end of a team meeting or, a medical, or even absent from a medical appointment, or it's at the beginning, but we're allowed, we're given this this mandate that we can only take a couple of minutes, or it's it's just kind of like tertiary, like, oh, he's a handsome young man who loves to laugh, and so on and so forth. And so it doesn't really do much to serve or steward the humanity. And that's because the systems, by the systems, I mean the educational system, the support systems, the therapeutic systems, the medical systems, all of those, they have their own sort of missions and mandates. As school system and adult service systems, their mandates are to educate and then later on keep them housed, keep them fed, keep them alive, keep them relatively safe. You know, the medical community is to keep them medicated or keep them, safe from or working on the challenges of their medical issues. And nowhere in there, typically, are there regular discussions of the soul of the person that they're treating, of the humanity of the person that we're treating. So that's one of the biggest external barriers that drive us to not being able to apply or embrace what it means to be person-centered. We all have that universal fight, and we're not going to be able to solve that tonight. Unfortunately, that is the case, but there are also other barriers. And I want to make sure that we acknowledge those too. These are internal barriers, and these are the things that we all, again, share, that are universal and that lie within ourselves. Some of those internal barriers that drive us include the natural nurturing instinct that we have to take care of our loved ones and protect them, that doesn't necessarily progress as they age. We kind of continue to hold on to that vulnerable small child, regardless of how big they get, regardless of how old they get. We hold on to that natural nurturing instinct, that mama and papa bear protection. Enough said, we all know what that's talking about. Survival is another thing that drives us away from being able to think person-centered. Just getting through every hour of every day is tough. And I can't even imagine to begin to think about anything else. Panic is another one of those internal drivers. What if something happens? What if all the what ifs, what if? And for Dravet and other syndromes like it, what about the next seizure? That is a level of panic that is constant in our lives. Other internal barriers include guilt, fear, internal and external. Somebody might hurt him, he might get hurt. What will happen to her without me? All of those fears are constantly kind of churning inside us. And then sometimes we bring forward trauma from our own childhood or from experiences during our journey with our child or from other relationships. The truth is that all of us, when we are parents and loved ones of people with disabilities, we have gone through a trauma on our journey. And it may be a small trauma because maybe the child was injured at birth or injured as a small child, or maybe given a diagnosis, but then they're able to kind of work forward and improve and their lives change and so on and so forth. Some of us carry years and years and years of trauma, and some of us live it every single day. So across that spectrum, we all have some level of trauma. And so our lives are trauma informed. And that leads us to do all of the things that we talked about as in terms of internal barriers. That brings forward and feeds our fear, our panic, all of those things that stop us from doing anything but trying so hard to protect and take care of our loved ones. And so those are actual barriers to being able to be person-centered, because person-centered means so many different things. But again, like I've already said, above all, being person-centered means that we have to let go of a whole lot of things. We, as caregivers, have to be open and ready to be vulnerable to all sorts of things that are meaningful and helpful in our loved ones' lives. So that we're going to talk about. So in addition to that, let's take a look at what are some of the things that we're doing right now that are contributing to not allowing us to associate what we're doing with being person-centered. This is something that I use, a slide that I use in all of my discussions about being person-centered. And a lot of times what I'm finding is that parents and caregivers are taking care of all of those things that are necessary for their loved ones to be housed, be relatively healthy, stay healthy, manage their medical needs, to get the services, to have the housing in the future that they need, to have guardianships and trusts and all of the benefits, Social Security, so on and so on and so on. And so we're taking care of all of those things right now. But what is it that we're forgetting? Well, we're forgetting what it means to steward the humanity of the people that we love. We're forgetting to take care of the joy and the dignity of life. And I'm not saying we're not striving to do this. Every one of us is striving to do this. But what I find is in the churn and all of that of caregiving, we're so focused on all of these other things that we are not nurturing. Not just, we might be understanding, we might have in amongst this that need and that to bring joy, that need to have opportunities that are fun, that need to make certain that our children are happy, but it's getting mixed up in all of these other things. And so we're forgetting to place as much priority on this as we are on these other things. And in a lot of ways, we're doing something else in the meantime, and that is we are doing too much. Sorry. Nope. There it is. My apologies. So we're doing too much. I do an entire workshop called Stop It, Caregiver Behaviors That Impede Progress, where I talk about overprotection and under preparation of the ones that we love. And both of these things contribute to greater challenges in physical and mental health for the people that we love, as well as dangerous caregiver burnout. So I can't do that whole workshop right now, but I want to start here with talking about some of the strategies that are really important, that speak to how we can begin shifting our thinking in being person-centered. And so, let's start by talking about this. In everything that we do for a loved one, we have to stop and think first. What part of that action or activity could they be doing themselves? We're all doing just about everything for them. And that's a lot of times because that's the easiest way to do it. It's the most efficient way to do it. And a lot of times, there are skill sets that they simply do not have to be able to do the entire activity by themselves. So I want you to think a little bit differently about that. We all need to feel valued and valuable as well as capable. Okay, we don't, as human beings, it is well known, and you can find this in research in all sorts of places, that as human beings, it's not just about receiving, it's also about giving. We need that balance to be able to feel fulfilled. We need to be able to feel valued, and we need to be able to feel capable and respected. So how is it that we can take what we're doing right now and expand that to make it a little more person-centered? For example, if our loved ones are choosing their own clothes for them, if we are choosing the clothes for our loved ones every day, from start to finish, at some point, they should be doing that for themselves. Now that's a typical kind of growth set. That's a typical, whether your kids are typical, and a lot of times in the disability world, that becomes a goal for them to be able to dress themselves. So they should be able to do it, and they likely are going to want to be able to do that, especially as they get older and they realize that they can make choices and so on. So by helping them learn that skill, we are demonstrating trust and value in their choices, and we're being person-centered. They may not be able to, in this example, your loved one may not be able to fully dress themselves, but if you're choosing every part of that for them, what piece of that might they be able to contribute to? Could they point out some of the things that they like? Could you give them a number of choices to choose from if you don't already? What is it that they may be able to physically do for themselves? Yes, again, time management and efficiency may dictate, if the bus is coming, for example, or you need to get out of the house, that you do that for them. But start thinking about building in that extra time to allow them to contribute to whatever activity that you're doing. So if you're choosing every meal for your loved one, what part of that can they participate in? Can they help make choices? Can they take a look at the food that's available and learn how to create a meal or participate in creating a meal? If your person wants to go out and do something alone or with friends, but that's not necessarily safe or available to them right now, what part of that activity is possible for them to be providing some input into? Could they choose who to go with, how to get there, what time to go, and what they're going to do when they're there? The more we provide our loved ones with options and decision-making authority, the more we are going to get to know their gifts and their desires. And the more they are going to feel that their gifts and skills and desires are recognized, honored, trusted, and valued, the stronger that they will become. Now, I just said something that might be like, to some of you. I probably said a lot of things like that, but so far what I just said was, the more we provide our loved ones with options and decision-making authority, the more we're going to get to know their gifts and skills and their desires. I can guarantee you, when you begin to step back when you can, and it's safe to, and observe interactions with other people, and observe that their responses to you providing them with opportunities to make choices, you will start to understand them better. You will discover new things about your loved ones that you didn't know. We're going to talk about the dangers of what I call presumed familiarity. That is the danger that we believe that we know everything and are the foremost authorities on our loved ones. That's going to be another part of our conversation. But it's just extraordinary when we step back, open ourselves up, make ourselves vulnerable, and provide new opportunities for our loved ones, that suddenly we learn new things about them. And it's such a joy for that to happen. So let's carry on. This is an important slide, and I'm going to bring it forward for you. As I move forward in our conversation tonight, I am going to be talking with you about something called the principle of normalization. I'm going to present it now, and I'm going to keep on referring back to it because it starts to take a deeper dive into the concept I've just shared about getting to know your loved one better through opportunity, vulnerability, and now through administering in your thought processes the principle of normalization. Now, that is an actual thing that has some meaning behind it and some history behind it. It goes way back to the 1960s and 1970s. And it is authored, there's a book called The Principle of Normalization. And this principle is something that was developed by a number of people in Europe and here by Wolfensberger, who was a noted psychologist. And in the 60s and 70s, there was a whole lot of deinstitutionalization that was happening in our country and in North America and in other parts of the world. And in the process of that, not only did person-centered principles and so on come into the forefront of our thinking in the disability community, but we started to learn about the principle of normalization as part of that. So the normalization principle means making available to all people with disabilities patterns of life and conditions of everyday living, which are as close as possible to the regular circumstances and ways of life of society. Normalization involves the acceptance of some people with disabilities, offering them the same conditions as are offered to other citizens. The awareness of the normal rhythm of life, including the normal rhythm of a day, a week, a year, and the life cycle itself. And the normal conditions of life, housing, school, employment, exercise, recreation, and freedom of choice previously denied to the individuals with severe, profound, or significant disabilities. What does this all mean? Blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of words. I didn't write them. I would have done a better job, not really. But the idea of the principle of normalization is really just boils down to this. In everything that we do, whether we are individuals with disabilities, caregivers, loved ones, and so on and so forth, we must apply the idea that every single individual has the right to be able to try to lead and access a life with the most normalized, typical patterns as we do. In other words, every disabled person has the right and needs to have the opportunities to lead the level of life that they wish to lead with the same rights and accessibility and opportunities that we all do. And I love the principle of normalization. It is a book. I recommend that you find it online and read it. It goes way, way back. So some of the language is a little archaic, but I love the principle of normalization. It has given me such an opportunity to learn for myself and remind myself on a regular basis of how we need to make certain that we are stewarding the humanity of those we love by providing them, among other things, the same opportunities that we have for ourselves. Now, I will give you this slide one more time while I set up for the next part of our conversation. However, I'm going to pull it out for just a second, and I'm going to check and see while I take a little drink of water if there are any questions or comments in the chat.
It doesn't look like we have anything yet, Cheryl.
Okay, thank you. Then I will carry on. I know this is a lot, and I want to make sure I'm watching my time as well. So I'm going to keep moving forward on this. So you'll hear me bringing up the principle quite a bit as we carry on with our conversation tonight. So let's move forward. Here are some of the next steps in doing what we're talking about tonight and learning how to become person-centered. First of all, let's talk about changing our perspective. I love this example of changing the perspective of how our approach to living and caring for people with disabilities. It's a great reminder from a book that I've read that I refer to at the end in my credits. It's a great reminder of the difference between the system-centered world that we live in and the world of people with disabilities. And so I'm just going to go down the list right now. And here's how we need to change our perspective. The rehabilitation view, if you look on this slide, let's call that the systems view. And the independent living view, let's change that to be more clear and talk about that as the person-centered view. Okay. So the terms for defining the problem within the system, as far as the systems are concerned, is that the problem is an impairment or a skill deficiency that lies within a person, where the person-centered view says that in defining the problem, we find a dependence on professionals, relatives, and others who take control over our lives. The problem is located, like I said earlier, in the systems view. The problem's located in the person. It's the person who has the problem. Versus in the person-centered view, it's in the environment and the way services do their work. What is the solution? Well, in the system-centered view that we all live in, the only solution is to have professional intervention. But in the person-centered viewpoint, The solution lies in the removal of barriers, advocacy, consumer control, and self-advocacy. The person themselves in a system-centered world is called the patient or the client. I like to call them a person or a citizen. Who's in charge? Well, in the system-centered world, it's the professional and pretty much everyone except the citizen. In a person-centered world, the person in charge is indeed the citizen. And what defines results? I love this one in the system-centered jargon that we're all used to. It's maximum possible individual functioning as judged by professionals. It's, achieving 90% of the goal 8 out of 10 times during the course of 20 minutes and so on. You know what I'm talking about in those IEPs. The person-centered system defines results as living independently and being in control of your life, regardless of how much assistance you need to do so. So that's a first step in changing our perspective, in addition to the things that we talked about and looking at how our person can begin to participate in the things that they're doing as activities throughout their lives. Here's another way, change our perspective. Let's keep going on how we can continue to become person-centered and some of the things that we can do. We can change the way that we speak. When we do, we shift our own way of thinking and we model the person-centered approach to others. So this is what happens all the time, and this is what we're all used to. And so I'm going to put it under don't versus do. When we're speaking about our person, again, as I said earlier, we are the ones who are in charge of stewarding their humanity above all. What we end up doing is speaking in jargon, using impersonal references, using system speak, and being problem focused. And those are the things that I'm going to ask you to continue to try to fight against. And instead to speak in terms of people, gifts, dreams and desires, happiness, and what's important to them. These are really, really important ways that we can shift not just our perspective, as we just spoke about, but the way that we speak. A lot of times when we go in, how many times I used to do this all the time, and I see parents and caregivers doing this now, especially in the educational system, but also in the medical system. When we go as advocates for the people that we love, we think that we have to adopt the same jargon that the doctors and the teachers are using because we believe that that's what we need to do to appear to be intelligent and ready to, speak in terms that they know, and that we have to meet them where they are. But when we do that, we choose system speak. We choose the way that they speak. And they, as we touched on earlier, their mission is to get those other things done. And it is our mission to remind the systems people in our lives that we are talking about a human being who has gifts and talents and dreams and desires. So wherever you are and whatever you're doing, if you do a little self-check-in about what language you're using, while everybody else in the room is using their systems language, it is important for you to bring forward that personal language, that person-centered language in what you're doing and how you're discussing your loved one. Let's move forward in more strategies and how we can change the way that we're doing things to be more person-centered. This is one of my favorites. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. I'm going to read from something that I've read many times from a couple of my biggest mentors, John O'Brien and Beth Mount. And what they wrote was a research paper that I want to read you excerpts from. And this is to introduce the idea of changing the way that we introduce our loved ones. So far we've talked about changing our perspective, changing the opportunities that we give our loved ones to participate in everything that they do. We talked about changing our language, and now we're going to talk about changing the way that we introduce our loved ones. And by doing that, like I said, I'm going to start with a little bit of a story. I'm going to give you two stories. And since I'm going to be reading, and you know that, I'm going to just bring it back to my camera and read two very, very short stories to illustrate how we need to change the way we introduce our loved ones. Here are two stories. The first one is this. Mr. Davis has a mental age of 3 years and 2 months. IQ equals 18. Severe impairment of adaptive behavior, severe range of mental retardation, becomes agitated and out of control, takes medicines for psychosis, severely limited verbal ability, inability to comprehend abstract concepts, learns through imitation, has learned to unlock the Coke machine and restock it, and to crank a power mower and operate it. His family is uncooperative. They break appointments and do not follow through on behavior management plans. That's the first story. Wouldn't you love to meet Mr. Davis now? But let's read the story that comes after that. Ed lives at home in his neighborhood. He visits extended family members and neighbors daily. He goes to local stores with his sisters and helps with shopping. He goes to church. Ed dresses neatly, is usually friendly, and shakes hands with people when he meets them. He's a very big man with limited ability to speak. And when he gets frustrated and upset, he cusses and talks to himself in a loud voice. These characteristics often frighten other people who do not know him well. He has been excluded from the work activity center because he acts out of control there and has broken some furniture and punches holes in the walls. It scares some of the staff and people very much. But he likes people and enjoys visiting in the neighborhood. He loves music, dancing, and sweeping. He likes loading vending machines and operating mechanical equipment. He likes to go shopping. He likes to cook for himself and for other people and can fix several meals on the stove at home. He likes to hang clothes and bring them in off the line. He likes to stack cordwood and help people move furniture. He prefers tasks that require strength and a lot of large muscle movement. Both of these stories were told of the exact same person. Both of them address the things that are probably necessary to know and important. But that first one just simply states a person, but not quite really a person. It's more like they're mentally ill kind of patient, right? And it does nothing that tells you anything about or stewards the humanity of this person. The second story was actually written by his family members. Both of those are true stories in terms of the way that they talk about. One of them is from a systems report. So as you can see, changing the way we introduce our loved one has a huge bearing on how they are perceived even before they walk in the door. And that's one of those things that really is important to me to impart to you. I talk about introducing, and I want to do a deep dive into a couple of other ways to kind of bring home this idea. And in doing so, I'm going to throw myself under the bus. I call this the dangers of historical overload. Why should we limit a deep dive into a person's history to remain person-centered? Why we should limit a deep dive. So I want you to imagine if everything you did, everything that happened to you came up over and over again when you were introduced to someone new. And so I'm going to use myself and my history as an example. And this kind of goes along with the same kind of concept of how are we introducing this person? How is it that other people are learning about them? So a lot of times that comes from an introduction from a systems person and or some sort of long systems report, assessments, data, so on and so forth. And here's an example of what can happen if we provide a person who is just being introduced to our loved one with too much information about our history. These are all truths about me, and here's what has happened. Here's what would happen if I were to be introduced with my history, my longest history. The experience that I had is a history of seizures, Is that important to know when you're introducing me to someone new? Well, maybe for a medical person, but otherwise no, because it only happened once. But the perception that comes with that, that follows me with that when someone hears that, is that I might be medically fragile and I might need a medical conservator or someone to oversee my medical needs. I was caught by the cops as a teen with alcohol. Is that important for someone who's just getting to know me to know? Well, not in my opinion, because the perception may be that I'm a troublemaker. I might need a supervised placement or a guardian. I used lorazepam. Is that important for someone to know? Maybe, but maybe not, because it was circumstantial and one period in my life when I was at my most difficult, things were most difficult with my son. But the perception may be, if someone learns that about me, is that I have a history of drug use or abuse, and possibly I might be mentally unstable. I have extensive experience living and traveling overseas. Is that important to know? Sure, because that's a positive thing and, makes me look kind of cool. And what the perception might be is that I am flexible, willing to try new things, and continuing this might be important to me. That's a positive one. And this last one is also very illustrative. If you were told in a report about me that I am estranged from 2 of my 3 sisters, is that important to know? Maybe in a small way, depending on who I'm talking to, but I can guarantee you the perception is going to be that my family supports seem extensive, but are actually limited. So if you heard that I had 3 sisters, but you may think that I have this great support system, but in finding out, it might be important for you to know, because my family supports are actually limited. So hopefully this illustrates in some way how important it is to make sure that we are balancing the need to tell all of a person's history and making sure that we're stewarding their humanity and being person-centered by not necessarily giving them all of the history that they need. Again, I'm not talking about medical professionals, but somebody who doesn't need to know about a person's entire history may end up feeling much better about them as a human being if they don't know everything. One last example, my son, who is 30 now, has a great, great life. But if his history of being hospitalized in a psychiatric ward for developmental disabilities, which he did for 9 months, carried through and was constantly in those reports and in that introduction of him, that is really unfair to him, because that really does not reflect who he is right now. So let's make sure that we are being careful about overloading a new person or introducing our loved ones as, a person with this long history when it isn't necessarily applicable to them anymore. And one more thing in terms of the solution under here, I want you to think about and remember that the records will likely precede your loved one into the next spaces where they go. So consider creating a profile page that you or the case manager attaches to or sends in advance. So really quickly, I'm just going to pass through this really fast, but a profile page is something that just does a single page of giving a person their most person-centered, humanistic qualities and their talents, their gifts, what people like about them, what they're really best at, and what's important for them, what makes them feel good. So I recommend that you create a profile page for your loved one. That's another strategy. I want to talk about another danger that I call the danger of presumed familiarity. And this is another thing that I do where I throw myself under the bus. And the idea of this is that again, when I talked earlier about how I saw some patterns of things that really worried me, no one person can paint the entire picture of another person, no matter how much they think they are the expert. I was seeing over and over again in doing person-centered planning, coming in and learning about a person. And I'd ask about something that we're gonna do a deep dive into shortly, about other relationships that the person might have in their lives, other friendships, other circles, and so on and so forth. And over again, I would learn from the parents or the caregivers that there was no one else in their lives, or that they didn't need anyone in their lives, even though they had teachers and other people that, you know, family members and so on, friends. If anybody was going to talk about them, or if anybody needed to know anything about them, it was just going to come from mom and dad. And that really worried me because, again, we'll go into another important part of being person-centered, but it really worries me when we as parents and caregivers believe that we are the one and only voice of authority over what kind of person our loved one is, what their desires are, what the things are that they need, and everything about them. That's something that's really, really dangerous. And again, I call it the danger of presumed familiarity. So let me just give you some example by using myself. And let's say that I suddenly became in need of care. And there are a number of people in my life that include family, my church community, fitness friends, the disability community, and GGA. GGA stands for Girls Gone Amok. That's a small group of friends that I go on vacation with a few times a year. What happens at GGA stays at GGA. But these are the people that are in my life, kind of compartmentalized. Now, let's say that I suddenly became in need of care. And only one of these groups of people was asked who I was. And I want you to think about this in terms of yourselves as well, okay? Because this is just, we're going to apply the principle of normalization here. Let's talk about anyone we know, starting with ourselves, because this is kind of eye-opening. Here's what my family knows about me. I like to go to bed early, wake up early. I speak Japanese. I love live concerts. My church community knows I'm a Christian. I love to sing. I don't like to teach. I enjoy visiting different churches and meeting new people. My fitness friends know that I prefer small groups to large groups. I'm competitive. I hate loud music. The disability community knows that I'm a good public speaker. In a live room, that's where I go, right? And everybody goes, yeah. I'm good at advocacy. I know a lot about autism. I know a lot about person-centered planning. And then my GGA girls know I love rum and Coke. I love to try local food tours. I love the beach. I like a little alone time each day, and I prefer my own room. Now, what if only one of these groups was asked the question, who is Cheryl? Now that we have to take care of her and she can't necessarily communicate who she is on her own. Tell me about Cheryl. And only one of the people, the only person that was asked about me was my family. And that was all my caregivers knew about me. They are only going to know one little part about me and who I am as a person. And what a shame. And let me give you a concrete example using this diagram. One of the things that would come into immediate conflict. My family knows, as I said on this, that I love live concerts. I do. All of this is true about me, by the way. I love live concerts. But let's say the only people that were called upon to talk about who I was to someone new was my fitness friends. What they would tell you is that I prefer small groups to large groups. I'm competitive, and I hate loud music. The truth is, I hate loud music in the gym, in the spin classes where you go into the small room and it's all like, I hate that. That drives me nuts. But if only they were the only one asked about who I was and they reported that I hate loud music, what do you think the chances are that I would ever be able to go to the live concerts that I love so much? The answer is none. So that's the illustration that I want to give you. In terms of being very aware of the fact that you are not the only person in your person's life that may have ideas and stories and experiences with you that can give a broader perception of who you are and help to steward your humanity. So your solution, among other things, is to reach out to others who know the person, ask them to share stories about when the person was at their best, happy and engaged. And from there, help to glean the story of your person in a much broader way. Again, think about that in terms of applying that to yourself and how scary it would be if only one of the people in your lives was the only person who could possibly explain you to someone who needed to care for you. Like I said, this is the same slide, but I circled the idea of circle members because that's kind of a person-centered term. And it's about something called circles of support. I want to do a very short, deep dive into the concept of circles of support, because this is one of the key central tenets of being person-centered. And it's that circle of support. If we had a little more time, I would do a little bit of an exercise with you called mapping our own circle. But I'll just explain it to you rather than actually doing the exercise, just so you can start to get the concept. When, again, this is an actual application that I use all the time to help people understand who's in their lives. Every single one of us has people in our lives, and they all play a different role. Being human, a part of the human experience is having people in our lives. None of us live in a bubble. And if we do live in isolation, it is unhealthy. It brings about mental and physical illness and shortens lives. That's all research. That's not my explanation, but it's true. So if you were to map your own circle, I would have you fill in a diagram like this, and I would guide you through the process of thinking about the people that are in your circle of intimacy, in your circle of friendship, in your circle of participation or association, and in your circle of economic exchange. And what usually happens is we see something like this. Those of us who do not have disabilities have all sorts of people in our circles of support. And they come from all different walks and experiences in our lives. And most importantly, they are people that we have chosen to be in our lives. And on the other side, people with disabilities, this is often what we see in their circles of support. We see parents and siblings and other family members, perhaps in that circle of intimacy, and then nothing in those circles of friendship and participation or association. And then in the outside circle, that circle of economic exchange, we see the people who are paid to be in their lives. So that's an important thing that we need to continue to talk about. So the idea is to make sure that you are stewarding the humanity of the person that you love and being person-centered by allowing other people into your loved ones' lives. That's a big one. I actually do an entire other workshop on building circles of support. So I'm not going to have time to do that deep dive into it right now, but I do want to bring forward a few key ideas. I want you to know that when you build a circle of support for your loved one, you need to do it with intention. And that's something that is also another common theme when I train other parents and caregivers around approaches like this. We have to be far more intentional than we are for ourselves, because you and I have the opportunities to go out and take risks and be vulnerable and choose the places that we go to and choose the places that people that come into our lives. But with people with disabilities, a lot of that is limited. So those of us who love them need to really plan ahead and be intentional in who we bring into our lives. So the idea of a circle of support is to chart their own circle. And I've given you templates in these slides on how to do that. Inviting the circle to gather, creating an agenda of positivity and possibility, using that non-system speaking in terms of gifts and talents and dreams and wishes, asking for stories, creating a space where just positive stories and ideas come out, and then bring forward a list of the needs. I need someone to help me get my person to Special Olympics. I need somebody to, this person brought forward the fact that my person loves to be outside. Well, I would love for someone here in this circle of support to find a way that they might be able to come and help my person spend some time outdoors with them, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the strategies around building a circle of support. It is really, really important to do. It's also one of the most difficult things that we as caregivers do. Why? Because it takes work, and also because it makes us vulnerable. But let me just give you a quick glimpse into what happens when we allow other people into our loved ones' lives. When a conversation or a gathering or any opportunity to have different voices representing our loved ones vis-a-vis a circle of support, here's what can happen: creative thinking without barriers or limitations, encouragement of enrollment of others, and that other people that may sustain and support that person in the future, bringing in new perspectives on overcoming obstacles and bringing excitement to the conversation. All of these things can take place, and even more when we become sensitive, understanding, open, and vulnerable to listening to others who may know our loved one in different capacities and allowing them to come in. But again, that's a huge thing to undertake. All of this talks about being person-centered. And so we're wrapping up time here, and I understand that, but I do want to share with you one video that comes from online of a mentor of mine named Norman Kuntz. And some of you may have heard of him, I don't know, but I love this video. And you know what? Let me ask real quick how much time we have left before I go ahead and play this, because it is a few minutes long.
You're okay, Cheryl. We were scheduled for another 14 minutes, so you have plenty of time.
Okay, well, this is an 11-minute video, and that's okay, because then the last couple of slides are just my closing. So let's do this. I'm really excited because I think you guys will love this. Now, this gentleman has cerebral palsy, so his speech is a little bit impaired, but there are subtitles under it. So I'm going to go ahead and play that, hopefully. And if not, then I'm simply going to play it. Let's see. All right. I know I was supposed to translate. Guys, I don't think it's going to play. But if I have capacity to share my screen, right? And I'm going to go the other way and bring that forward. In the meantime, while I'm setting that up, are there any new questions in the chat?
You did have a comment, and then also it looks like this other question was direct message to me, so I don't think you can see that one, but they're kind of connected. So the comment came from Barb, and she just said that it's such an interesting and important concept. She finds herself doing system speaks just to get from point A to point B when working within the systems. I wish systems would emphasize or ask more who the person is, and then just said how important it is for parents and guardians to keep that in mind.
Yes.
And then the question that came in was from another parent who said, do you have any suggestions for how to change other perspectives? In my case, I'm thinking particularly of my in-laws and school staff.
Yes. Thank you for that question. So we're going to have to do some of the work in advance. Remember, I talked about creating, like within the, the staff and so on and so forth, the idea of creating a one-page profile. But also you have the opportunity in most states in the IEP process to create a vision statement or a parent statement or something like that. So if that's where you are in your journey and your child is in school and you're doing these educational plans and so on, there's an opportunity to make sure that you are filling all that space up with, here's who this person is, here's what's important to them. And there's a distinction between what's important to them and what's important for them. It's important to my son that he has a computer so he can access YouTube all the time, but it's important for him that he gets his meds on time. Big difference. If Nikki was asked, what's important to you, he's not going to say, well, that my meds are on time, but he is going to say that, I get to watch YouTube. So what's important to them, what their gifts are, what their vision might be for themselves in the next few months. So you got to have those conversations. You got to present that information. A lot of it. So again, a lot of it depends on us in terms of family involvement. That is a really, really tough one. But I would suggest that, again, under the heading of being vulnerable, I would suggest that you invite them intentionally to a place where you can have a conversation and you can invite them to tell stories about the person that you love, or you can start that conversation. Let me tell you some stories. And you can create this atmosphere that is not agenda driven about you got to do better, you're not doing enough, so on and so forth. And just talk about open and honestly about some of those stories. Some of them are going to be good and some of them might be bad, but help them to be a part of the conversation. Some of the problem might be that there are walls built. Maybe they built them, maybe you built them, intentionally, unintentionally. You know, that's a big one. A lot of times, you know, our parents are not used to being around people with disabilities. They don't really know how to do it. If you think about it, even my generation, I graduated in the 1980s from high school, and children with disabilities were not part of our peer group. They weren't anywhere to be seen. So for all of us who are not among the first generation of people who experience peers in inclusive classroom settings and so on, you know, that's a big stretch for us to understand that. That doesn't mean that meanness is okay. That doesn't mean that exclusivity is okay. I also want to provide the space to allow you, if necessary, to be okay with not having people like that in your life, regardless of who they may be. Because if they are not willing to have open conversations or bring positivity into your life and their lives, then there's just not going to be enough room. And you would not be alone if that were the case. Lean on those who do understand.
I think that's a great point.
Thank you. I don't think we're going to have time because I took a lot of time to answer that question. But in my slides, which I am sharing, which are on my website, I would like to encourage you to go and click on that link and check out that video because it really is extraordinary. Am I still? Yep, there we go. All right, so let me go to my last little bit. This is kind of my exit discussion. There has been a lot of discussion tonight. I have talked a lot about a lot of things. I have touched on a lot of different concepts and ideas around being person-centered. I hope that I've been able to give you some insight into what it means. I could talk about this for hours. I'm happy to come back if you'll have me, but this is just so important to me that I hope I've imparted some of this. There is a short reel on Instagram created by the Dravet Syndrome Foundation where Amy, Gloria, and Sarah describe the pain and fear that they live with as they watch their beautiful children with seizures live with seizures every single day. This is a powerful testimony, and I'm sure it had the intended effect on the scientists and medical professionals attending the drug development meeting. Amy talks about how every milestone, every holiday, every typical, simple pleasure of childhood is marked by either complete absence or panicked vigilance. And this video ends with Gloria, who states, "An extraordinary life without seizures is all we want." So I hope that I have created a space for all of you to shift your thinking just a little today and softly, gently bring you to a place where you say, "An extraordinary life is all I want." So thank you. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll bring this up briefly. This is one of my favorite quotes from John Vanier. You may know him. "We all know well that we can do things for others and in the process crush them, making them feel that they are incapable of doing things by themselves. To love someone is to reveal to them and to others, I would add, their capacities for life, the light that is shining in them." I do a number of other different kinds of workshops. You can read those in my slide. But again, I think I'm supposed to bring this up. There we go.
Perfect. Thank you, Cheryl. This has been such a great presentation, and we really appreciate having this information to share with all of our community. For those that may have come on late today, this will be available on demand in the next day or two, and you'll receive an email with information on how to access it. If you have any questions for Cheryl or want to learn more about the different opportunities she has available, you can visit her website at CherylRyanChan.com. And if you have any questions, of course, you can also reach out to us at info@dravetfoundation.org. And then finally, I'd once again like to thank and recognize our title sponsor for tonight's session, which was BioCodex, and also to thank our other sponsors for the support of this educational webinar series, which is Jazz Pharmaceuticals, Takeda, and UCB. And thank you all and have a good night.
I am happy to stick around for more questions if you would like.
It looks like we might have gotten one more that just, let me see if that's correct. Oh, no, that was, I'm sorry, everyone was saying thank you and good night. I saw Barb's screen earlier, so I think we're all set.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you again and again. I'm